Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. Why is Congress so useless? 3 months into the most energetic administration since Andrew Jackson, Congress is doing nothing on the economy. Nothing on the red tape, taxes, predatory lawsuits, environmental and DEI mandates, and spending-driven inflation that created our Rust Belt, with lousy trade deals simply greasing these skids. Without this, we will not get that glorious reindustrialization to turn tariff chaos into a national renaissance. Instead, if Congress does not get off its butt, tariffs will become just another tax. Even the border and mass deportations are being funded by ambitious accounting on the part of Donald Trump. Congress has tossed in a measly $500 million for the border, which is chump change in Washington, basically an office party Christmas present. Note that just $70 million of that went for the wall, which is about 6 transgender operas worth. In a recent video, I mentioned how Congress is now trying to respend Doge, spending between 85 cents on the dollar, the House budget, and 99 cents, the Senate budget, on new programs, including an increase in our comically overfunded military budget. All this with a Republican Congress elected by voters who vociferously support Trump, Elon, and a wholesale gutting of the federal government. So why is Congress so bad? Now, true Republicans have a very slim majority, with rhinos casting the deciding vote, and few Democrats outside John Fetterman crossing the line. But the big reason is structural, the reason Congress always fights change: the filibuster. This is a Senate rule, as in it's not part of the Constitution, where almost all bills require 60 senators. It was passed to protect slavery in the South, but it effectively paralyzes Congress, since it means almost all laws require both parties to pass. In other words, the filibuster is the uniparty. There's just 2 exceptions: so-called reconciliation, where 50 plus 1 can pass a single spending bill, a single revenue bill, and a single debt limit bill each year. The other is recent changes to the filibuster, where political appointees and judges now only need 50 plus 1. By the way, without that change, only 3 people in Trump's cabinet would have gotten through, so we'd have no RFK, no Pete Hegseth, no Tulsi, no Kash Patel. Be 23 rhinos against Trump. Now take that image, and that's exactly how the filibuster paralyzes everything else: regulatory reform, manufacturing tax cuts, voter ID, nationwide injunctions, insider trading for Congress. Happily, the solution is very easy: just change the rules again. Filibuster should only apply to things that change the rules of the game, like packing the court or mass amnesty to replace voters with freshly imported ones. For everything else, majority rules, since we are, in theory, a democracy. Donald Trump has been arguing this since 2017, calling the filibuster, quote, ridiculous, and, quote, we've got a country to fix, and we're not messing around with 60 votes. So what's next? Interestingly, while the filibuster requires 60 votes, changing the rules only requires 50 plus 1. In other words, Republicans can do it tomorrow. While I'm a huge fan of the government doing nothing, paralyzing Congress effectively locks in the FDR-era deep state that Trump and Elon are fighting. Filibuster locks in the uniparty, it hands control to special interests who spread their bribes, and all that ratchets up state power and state corruption at the expense of the people who wait for Congress to finally do something useful. Home buys just hit a 16-year low, in fact, the lowest since the 2008 housing crisis. Will buying a home become a lost art, a myth from a bygone golden age? The numbers come from the National Association of Realtors, who report that March existing home purchases fell 5.9% from the previous month, which is a very big move in a single month. In fact, it was the biggest drop since the Fed first started furiously hiking mortgage rates back in 2022. In some regions, it was even worse. Out west, sales fell 9.4% in a month. That brought the tally to just 4 million homes sold on the month. For perspective, before the pandemic, we averaged 5.5 million house sales per month. In 2021, it was 6 million. So the numbers reflect sales in January and February, meaning right around when Trump took office. The main driver, of course, is mortgage rates, which averaged 7% in those months and are not much better today. Now, 7 is actually not that high historically. In the Goldilocks economy of the 1990s, mortgages averaged about 7.5%. In fact, mortgages were double digits in the golden 1980s. The problem, of course, is that for 20 years starting in 2001, the dot-com crash, the Fed manipulated interest rates to nearly zero, meaning they manipulated mortgages to as low as 3%. The problem is if you hike from 3% mortgages to 7%, it puts millions of homes on ice. People cannot afford to sell because they can't afford a 7% mortgage. That would more than double their payment. So even if they want to trade up, maybe they had more kids, or they want to trade down if the kids moved out, they cannot afford it. Pretty much the only people selling are either moving to another city for a job or like they died. This lock-in cuts housing inventory, the number of homes for sale, by nearly half since the Fed's hikes. Now, toss in young people who are treading water financially or doom spending into debt slavery, and it is a frozen market. So let's say, the biggest concern with the frozen housing market is what happens when it unfreezes. We're already seeing storm clouds. Housing inventory is up 20% from a year ago as homes keep getting built. Now, inventory is still only about 2/3 of normal, but 20% is a big jump. Meanwhile, if we get a recession or close to it, the Fed historically cuts rates and cuts them fast. That normally helps home prices, but at the moment, it also unfreezes all those millions of frozen homes. This could mean a tsunami of unsold homes that guts the last man standing in many Americans' net worth, the equity in their house. Americans are currently sitting on $52 trillion worth of home equity, which is more than a third of their net worth. That means every 1% drop in house prices knocks out over $500 billion from Americans' balance sheet. That then filters through to consumer spending, which makes up 2/3 of the economy, talks in anxiety from falling stock prices, rising debt balances, and a potential recession. You could get a crash in spending, which then leads to a crash in jobs. Of course, there is a solution, but Congress won't like it. Spending cuts to make room for tax cuts, along with deregulation, both on a massive enough scale that wages catch up to house prices before the plunge. Sadly, given Congress's recent behavior, that is a pretty long bet. A word from our lead sponsor, Unchained.com. In the new year, it's time to think about your annual IRA contributions. An IRA is an investment vehicle that can save you a lot of taxes. With Unchained, you can hold real Bitcoin in your IRA, get access to trading, inheritance, and loans, and it's the only company where you hold the keys and can verify that your Bitcoin is not being relent like banks do. We've seen futures-based ETFs underperform holding your own Bitcoin, so why settle for less? Book a friendly consultation at unchained.com/Peter. If you own gold or silver, you know they're a great hedge against financial instability and let you grow your wealth outside the banking system and gain greater control over your finances. Monetary Metals offers you the ability to increase your precious metal ounces every single month. Instead of paying to own metal, with Monetary Metals, you get paid 4% on your gold paid in more ounces. Now's the time to secure your wealth and build your legacy in an asset that the government cannot inflate away. Join thousands of investors earning interest in physical gold and silver every month with Monetary Metals. Visit monetarymetals.com/Peter to learn more. Now back to our show. Canadians just voted their country from the frying pan into the fire as their new left-wing globalist tool of a prime minister swept elections that puts him in charge through 2029. It was a stunning collapse for the Conservatives led by infamous apple muncher Pierre Poilievre, who lost his own seat, which is embarrassing. Just 3 months ago, Pierre was at 92% on prediction market Kalshi, and he was leading in the polls by as much as 27 points. So two things popped the bubble. First, the Liberals ditched the ridiculous Justin Trudeau for Mark Carney, a World Economic Forum tool who looks presidential on TV. Second, Donald Trump, whose insults and jibes about annexing Canada triggered a rally round the maple leaf at the expense of Poilievre, who Canadian media framed as Canada's Trump. Even with these, it was close. 338 Canada has Liberals at 43% and Conservatives at 39%. Still, Canada's electoral system means a small difference in the vote means a very big difference in Parliament, with Liberals projected to win over half of seats to a third for Conservatives. So what's coming for Canadians? It is not good. If Trudeau was a useful idiot for the globalists, Carney is a true believer. His advisors are pushing even higher mass immigration, so 500,000 per year for a country 1/9 the size of the U.S. On the economy, Carney is a champion of the World Economic Forum's agenda of more government spending, more racist DEI, more climate controls, and carbon taxes that will cripple Canadian businesses, especially in energy. Carney's been a passionate advocate of a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, which would replace physical cash with a government-controlled cryptocurrency that would give totalitarian control over the economy. Carney has been downright giddy about the prospect of Canadians handing over their lives to government, positively savoring how willing Canadians were to, quote, surrender to Leviathan during COVID. Meanwhile, he called Canadian truckers, quote, seditionists, which carries a 14-year prison sentence. Finally, Carney is likely to ramp up friction with the U.S., instead cozying up to the European Union, who, after all, sees eye to eye on authoritarian censorship and social engineering from migration to global warming. This throws blue-collar Canadians under the bus, given that 3/4 of Canada's exports are to the U.S., meaning over 1 in 5 Canadian jobs depends on export to the U.S. EU exports are 15 times smaller. But I guess it gets Carney into some choice cocktail parties in Paris. So what's next? 10 years of Justin Trudeau gutted middle-class Canadians, delivering West Virginia wages and San Francisco home prices. Wages in Canada are flat since 2016. Household debt is the highest in the G7. Economic growth since 2019, since the pandemic, is the lowest out of 50 developed countries. According to Stats Canada, 40% of middle-class Canadians are living hand-to-mouth, and according to Angus, almost half of Canadians are considering leaving the country. Zero Hedge sums it up. This is not new boss, same as the old boss. This is Carney will do much more harm to Canadians' jobs and incomes, to their rights and liberties, and to turn Canada into a country its people no longer recognize. Chinese factories are getting wiped out in the trade war, with one analyst calling it, quote, way bigger than COVID-19. COVID-19 meaning the near 20% drop in Chinese manufacturing back when the world shut down. Last week I mentioned the extraordinary measures China is using to cover up the devastation from Trump's tariffs. These include forcing nearly 1 million state-owned firms to buy their own stocks, threatening regular people who sell stocks, and forcing Chinese banks to buy the Chinese currency while dumping over $1 trillion in government stimulus for bridges to nowhere and cities in nowhere. Container tracker Vizion reports containers from China are down by half. Factories are furloughing half their employees or even stopping production altogether. Thousands of small Chinese manufacturers are already on the verge of bankruptcy, according to CNBC. Now, in the old days, China just routed exports through a nearby country like Vietnam. But given Trump is going after those diversions, Chinese firms are considering moving the whole operation to a country like Vietnam, India, or Mexico. In other words, keep the customers but ditch the Chinese factory. Now, the context here is between 10 and 20 million Chinese workers work for export to the U.S. So if these temporary furloughs turn into permanent job losses, China will get civil unrest, starting with politically sensitive cities like Shanghai or Beijing itself. Meanwhile, tariffs are already showing up in online prices, with price hikes on Amazon of 25% plus for Chinese goods. Now, that's a lot lower than 145% tariffs, because tariffs go on the price at the port, which is typically half or a quarter of the price at the store. There's markups along the way that are not tariff. So 145 becomes 25. Still, even 25 is a big difference from Trump's last trade war with China in 2018, when essentially zero of the tariffs were passed on. Now, back then, it was because Beijing was literally compensating companies for the tariffs, meaning the Chinese government was paying our taxes, which is fun. Alas, 145% is too much for Beijing to handle, so companies are passing it on. The biggest change has been in websites like Shine or Temu, which sell dirt-cheap t-shirts and hair ties from over 3,000 suppliers in China that are being tariffed for the very first time. Background here is something like 50 to 100 billion in small dollar Chinese imports that have been completely tariff-free for decades under something called the de minimis exemption, which says small international shipments gets zero scrutiny. It's like mailing a letter. Now, in the case of China, that goes up to $800 that is completely exempt. Trump just closed that loophole, meaning once they sell off inventory, it is the end of the $5 Chinese t-shirt. So what's next? The 2018 tariffs were small enough that they didn't do much to prices and they didn't do much to China. These tariffs are a nuclear weapon. No company can survive a 145% tariff for long, and Beijing apparently cannot cover the tab. China is putting a brave face, but it cannot handle a tariff war that's bigger than COVID and goes on for 4 years. Meanwhile, reindustrializing America will take many years, while Trump's got roughly 16 months until the midterm elections. Both sides want a deal. It's a game of chicken who breaks first. A word from our sponsor. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is CoinKite, maker of the famous block clock. CoinKite devices are made in Canada and they're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's CoinKite.com/ProfSaintAnge. In crypto, we read about new hacks every week with top coins spiraling into oblivion. Except for Bitcoin. It has never been hacked. The enormous innovations going into crypto will ultimately migrate to the gold standard of Bitcoin. Trammell Venture Partners is a Bitcoin native venture capital firm that's been around since the beginning back in 2009. They back some of the top brands in the industry, including Kraken and Unchained. Check out the third annual report on Bitcoin native startups, tracking nearly 1.2 billion in early-stage Bitcoin native software startups. Visit tvp.fund. Now back to our show. It's official, GDP is negative, and it is glorious. Last week, the Bureau of Economic Analysis reported that GDP for the first 3 months of 2025 turned negative for the first time since 2022. The kicker is all of it was caused by a 41% surge of imports front-running tariffs, which official GDP bizarrely counts as negative GDP. Without those, actual GDP soared by 4.5%, which is Asia level. It actually gets better because government spending dropped for the first time since 2022. Control for that, and the economy grew by nearly 5% on the quarter, which, fun fact, is double China's current growth rate. So what's driving the boom? Simple private sector investment, the mother's milk of prosperity. BAA said investment skyrocketed in the quarter by 22%, much of it driven ironically by the very same tariffs that took the headline number down, as in foreign companies are falling over themselves to move production inside Donald Trump's tariff umbrella and produce in America. So going by those numbers, America is reindustrializing at light speed, and the tip of the spear is foreign companies moving production here. Recent video, I'd mentioned how massive these incoming investments are. At the time, it was $3 trillion, including $165 billion from Taiwan Semiconductor, $100 billion from Japan SoftBank, $500 billion from Apple, and $2 trillion combined from Dubai and Saudi Arabia. That number is now up to $5 trillion in announced deals. Last week, Trump said the real number is $8 trillion and counting. For perspective, pre-COVID gross private investment in the entire country was about $4 trillion. So Trump has already doubled that, maybe tripled it, in 3 months. That implies a massive boost in high-paying jobs. The Taiwan Semiconductor project in Arizona is projected to create 40,000 construction jobs. Multiply that by between 20 and 50 times for the other projects. The one concern on GDP had been consumer spending, with media hyping soft consumer surveys. In a recent video, I mentioned how these surveys are questionable since big moves are driven by partisanship. As in, people who hate Trump say the economy sucks, people who love him say it is grand. Well, the BEA just reported consumer spending is on fire, hitting 0.7% on the month, which is close to a 9% annualized gain in consumer spending. Finally, inflation, which also reported last week at flat, as in zero inflation for the second time in Trump's 3 months. Soaring investment and crashing inflation being just about the sweetest 4 words in economics. So what's next? Before Trump took office, I figured the economy would be a cage fight between Biden's recession overhang and Trump boosting investment, energy, and cutting regulation. I did not anticipate how bigly Trump's tariffs would boost investment. $5 trillion is monster numbers. As for the immediate future, all these front-run imports will likely show up next quarter as consumption or investment, delivering a big, beautiful GDP number even on paper. Meanwhile, those monster investment numbers will start taking pole position, swamping any hits to paper GDP from government layoffs and mass deportations. Last week, a reporter asked Trump about the negative GDP print, and he said, quote, "Be patient, the boom is coming." So far, that's exactly what's happening. And if Congress gets its butt in gear on deregulation and tax cuts, it could go even faster. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersanons.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.